particularly about the first owner, who was Charles Wilkins, who was Wenonah's first mayor, a businessman, and a community leader. And Rick has a very interesting story. As we were chatting, getting acquainted, and arranging for this program tonight, he and his wife found this home in Wenonah, and it's a very interesting story about what he's going to tell us about how that happened. So our talk, the title is The Wilkins, a First Family of Wenonah. Let's welcome Rick Mitchell.
How you drew me today, which that all relates to how I got to Wenonah in the first place. So my wife and I, this is 2010, lived in Woodbury on 45 North Pot Street. We were very happy there, had no intentions of moving, hadn't discussed anything about looking for a house at all. As a matter of fact, we had plans to redo the kitchen. They were being drafted up and stuff. And a friend of mine at work was looking at a young family, was looking to move from wherever he was. And he was looking in Haddon Heights on the Haddonfield side of Route 30. And some of the houses he was looking at were just, I thought, unbelievably expensive. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, David's, he's going to pay, I can't believe he's going to pay for the house he's looking at. I said, there's houses around here. I said, what's that little town? You know, we go past it sometimes. And she had a shop up in Mullica Hill, so sometimes we kind of scoot through this way. And so one Saturday, and I think it was in January, we decided to come back and just sort of drive through Wenonah, just look at for sale signs or whatever. And I think it's 203 South Clinton's. That's sort of the other half of the Stephen Green house that burned in the fire and ended up being two houses. That one was for sale. And I pulled up, there was a sign there, and I pulled up alongside the house, and the realtor, who was Wanda Lee, I guess it's McElhaney, was coming out of the house, and we started talking. She said, you want to come in and see it? So, okay, we'll go in and take a look. And we acted like we were interested in buying a house in Wenonah and that kind of thing. And, you know, she showed us the house. It was not a house we'd be interested in, but it gave me an idea of what you'd get for the price and that sort of thing. So we leave, and then Wanda contacts me about, you know, if we're going to buy a house, do we have a house that we're selling? And, you know, she was trying to get the realtor for that house. And she was suggesting that she come over and take a look at our house in Woodbury and could give us an idea of what we could get for it and that sort of thing. And I was worried that this kitchen remodeling we were doing was maybe too much for where we lived, and maybe we were going to put too much money into that. So I said to Warren, my wife, I said, you know, I'd love to have her actually come over and give me a number on the house, and I could get some feel for whether we should do these kitchen renovations. Still, no intention of, we weren't even thinking of buying a house anywhere. A couple Saturdays from then, the phone rings, and it's Wanda, and she said, a house has just come on the market that I know you're going to love. This is going to be the house, you know, this is really the house you've got to come see. And I said, well, okay, you know, I wanted to keep in good graces because I still wanted to come over to our place. And I said, you know, when would you suggest? And she said, well, actually, there was just a showing for brokers. I said, I'm right at the house right now. If you could leave right now, it'd be perfect. We'll just stay here and come along. So I said, okay, I'll come up. So I turned to my wife and I said, I'm going to run up and look at some house in Wenonah. I said, I'm going to be there 10 minutes tops. And just want her to, you know, still think we're interested in the market. Do you want to come? Marta says, yeah, I'll come along. So we drive up, get out of the car, walk in the front door, and I would say within about 2 minutes of walking in, I knew we were going to buy the house. My wife just totally fell in love with the house. It was Sue McNally's old house, and it's a real nice house when you walk into it. But anyway, so that's how we got to Wenonah. Had zero intention of doing anything. I was trying to help out my friend, and we ended up buying the house. So that's how random things work. I'm going to hand out, how many of us are here? I think everybody can have them. So what these are folders that have in them the talk I'm going to give tonight. So that's in there, sort of all typed up. And then there's attachments and things that I'll refer to along the way when I'm talking tonight. And if you're reading this, it'll refer to them too. And they're all numbered and stuff. So you'll find in there a couple of pictures of Charles Wilkins. There's some stuff in there that's too long to read now. That's something you might want. You can take them with you when we're done. But I think it'll just be helpful to have something to refer to. I wasn't sure what was available here in terms of audio, visual, and that kind of thing. So this is the gentleman we're talking about today, Charles Wilkins. He was born in Philadelphia in 1853 to a prominent Pennsylvania family. Let me also say, just in terms of source authorities and stuff, a lot of what I have in here is from the biographical, genealogical, and descriptive history or something like that of the first New Jersey congressional district. There are 2 volumes. They were done back in 1900. And they were really good for source information on individuals. I suspect that they were largely written by the people themselves. So I think, they said to Wilkins, we'd like to have you in here, and could you write something up? And I think he writes something. I don't think the editors could possibly know some of the information. But, Wilkins probably chose the word prominent Philadelphia family. So I don't know if it's a prominent Philadelphia family. But that's what it said. He's from English Quaker stock. His ancestors came to Pennsylvania and New Jersey in the early 1700s. His paternal grandfather, who was also named Charles, was a native of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. His father, Joseph, was born in Philadelphia and was active in the coal mining and shipping businesses. Joseph's father was a mason and well-known and respected in the community. Joseph married someone named Marty Mansour, and her ancestry was French Huguenot. Altogether, Joseph and Marty had 11 children. I don't know where Charles was in that sequence, other than I know he wasn't youngest, because I know he has a younger brother, but I don't know where he was in that string. When he was in 1860, the family moved to New York. Charles was 7, and that's where he attended public and private schools and did most of the schooling there. The business, the wholesale coal trade business, was going well for a while. But then it started falling on hard times, and Joseph decided that the family had to move back to Philadelphia. So in 1870, when Charles was 16 or 17, the family returned to Philadelphia. Right after that, his father died, and the older kids really had to go to work to get money to help support the family. So Charles found employment first as a wholesale drug house in Philadelphia, and he worked there for several years. In 1875, he got employment as a bookkeeper with a company called Partridge and Carter. His brother already worked there, and his brother was like 5 or 6 years younger, so I think at a lower level kind of job relative to the bookkeeper. It was a relatively new company. It was formed in 1867, and was a manufacturer of electrical supplies. And when you think back to 1875, that's sort of like the internet or something today. I mean, that was really kind of on the forefront of technology. In 1884, so they're there about 10 years, and they're both brought in as partners in the business. So you have Partridge, you have Carter, and you have the 2 Wilkins brothers. I think it was the third, the 2 Wilkins brothers having 1/6 each. Partridge dies in, I think, 1884 or something like that. No, yeah, and the 2 Wilkins brothers buy out his interests. So now the Wilkinses control 2/3 of the companies. They really control the company at that point. And Carter, I think, was still around for a while, but I found some evidence online that he transferred a bunch of patents and things over to the Wilkinses and stuff. I think he gradually kind of stepped out of the business, and it really was being run by the Wilkins. I think initially, Charles assumed the role of president of the company, and the brother was in charge of manufacturing and sales. But then by 1912, I found a phone directory where Charles was listed as vice president, not as president. And in 1920, E. Ward Wilkins, his brother, was listed as president. And it's not clear to me at that point, for reasons that will come up a little bit later, that Charles was even involved with the company by the time you get to 1920. Because the U.S. Census has him in Dallas. So I think he was, a different business. So I think that E. Ward Wilkins, the brother, sort of took over the business. I think Charles was very active in it for a number of years, but gradually decided to do something else. Number 2 in your packet is a little excerpt from a catalog of Carter and Wilkins. One of the things at the back you'll see is something called an enunciator. And they have all kinds of patents on these enunciators, and they really tried to sell them for hotels, but also for individual homes and stuff. And the idea was that if you were in a hotel, and there'd be one of these on the wall, and you could flip a switch or something, and it would move an electromagnet down in the central room, down in the basement of the first floor, and that would say somebody, in room 5 on the second floor needs attention. So that was sort of their call button of the day. And some of them had to be reset manually, some were automatic resets, all kinds of things. But that it seems so primitive, but that was the big thing, one of the big things they sold, and they made a lot of money on that. There's a picture on the last page of that catalog of one of these here. It looks like Charles became active, as I was saying, with another company sometime in 1920. According to the U.S. Census, he was in Dallas, Texas, with his wife and his younger daughter. The business he listed was storage batteries. By 1922, he's listed in the Toronto City Directory as living in Toronto and an officer of Willard Storage Battery, headquartered in Cleveland. Willard Storage Battery was a very successful and growing company, having a huge share of the automobile battery market. Charles appears to have stayed with Willard in Toronto until his death in 1933. So I think from around 1921 to 1933, Charles is up in Toronto. Both Charles and E. Ward, and by the way, I tried to find out what the E in E. Ward stood for. I probably spent more time on that than anything else. And I could not figure it out, so I'm just going to call him E. Ward. Charles and E. Ward were very active in the electrical manufacturing industry and lots of trade organizations. Charles served for a time as president of the National Electrical Trades Association, which is headquartered in Chicago. It was a very influential organization made up of leading firms in the industry. He was also active in the National Association of Manufacturers and the National Electrical Credit Association, and was very well known and respected in industry trade circuits in the United States and Canada. E. Ward was a member of the Electrical Association of Philadelphia and also a whole bunch of other trade associations. So these guys were very active in the business at that time. Charles married Harriet C. Little of Hudson, New York in 1898 when he was 25 years old. Harriet was the daughter of George Little, who came from an old New England family that eventually settled on the banks of the Hudson at the end of the Revolutionary War. In almost everything you look at, you'll see that Charles and Hattie, she went by Hattie, was generally, they show her having 2 daughters, Julia Rose and Edna Browning. But I came across a 3rd child, a boy who was born stillborn, and I'm pretty sure the reference was to them. I found a death certificate dated September 17, 1879. It was issued in Philadelphia. It lists the father as Charles M. Wilkins, the mother's Hattie C. Wilkins, and she went by Hattie. And their address is 510 Dickinson Street in Philadelphia. I also found a Philadelphia directory showing Charles Wilkins and E. Ward Wilkins at that Dickinson Street address in the 1878 to 1879 time frame. So I'm pretty sure that's the same Wilkins, and I think that death certificate is theirs. So I believe they had a stillborn son in 1879, and then Julia comes along in 1882, and Edna Browning comes along in 1884. They're still in Philadelphia at that point. Sometime in 1885 or 1886, the family took up residence in Wenonah. On August 1st, 1888, Charles and Harriet purchased a newly constructed home at 206 East Willow Street from Stephen Green. It's the house where Marna, my wife, and I live today. Stephen Green took back a $3,500 mortgage. We actually have the original mortgage, the handwritten, every time you made a payment, they'd handwrite in the amount and all that stuff. we were at settlement, Sue gave us a box, and we thought it was like refrigerator warranties. It was all these historical papers, and one of them was that mortgage. I don't know if that was the purchase price for the house, because they may have paid some cash at settlement. It just wasn't clear to me whether it was or not. Charles became very active in the Wenonah community very quickly. He served as the borough's first mayor in 1886 to early 1887, and then again in 1899. He also served on borough council from 1887 to 1893, and then again from 1895 to 1897. He was interested in education and served at various times on the school board. He was president of the board at times. He was a lover of books and an avid reader and collector. He was president of the Wenonah Library Association for a number of years. And I even found him listed as an officer of the Wenonah Hose Company No. 1 in 1888, so he was everywhere. When the closed and shuttered Wenonah House was bought by Stephen Green in 1892 for $5,000, Green formed a little syndicate of people to put in money to figure out what to do with this thing, and he was part of that syndicate. So eventually that became Wenonah Inn, the new Wenonah Inn that was built. And he had a financial interest in that. He joined and was active in the Presbyterian Church, serving both as an elder and as superintendent of the Sunday school. In politics, he was a stalwart Republican and involved himself in politics at the county and state levels. He served as a member of the Republican County Executive Committee for Gloucester County and was elected as a delegate to state and congressional conventions. In 1896, he was a member of the New Jersey delegation to the St. Louis Presidential Election Convention, where McKinley was nominated for the first time. I've included in your packet an item marked number 3, which is an article from the Courier-Post about a big fundraising dinner for Congressman Loudenslager, if that's how you say it, which was at the Union League on Saturday, December 13, 1902. It was attended by a ton of dignitaries. Charles Wilkins was there, E. Ward was there, and you probably need a magnifying glass. It's a long, skinny article, but it's an interesting article. I mentioned a little while ago that he was the lover of books and a book collector. He was said to have one of the finest private libraries in South Jersey, containing several thousand volumes, including some rare and valuable pieces. His library contained books covering a large variety of subjects in literature. He apparently had his own Dewey Decimal System, his own organization system, so if you wanted to find a book on so-and-so topic, he could get you there pretty quickly, and it was probably right over there or something like that, and he prided himself on his indexing system. Somehow he established a connection with L. Frank Baum, who's the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and William Denslow, who illustrated that book along with a bunch of other things. Denslow was a Philadelphian by birth and also took up residence in Chicago, and I'm wondering because Charles was going to Chicago from time to time and was a Philadelphian originally himself, but maybe that their paths crossed somewhere along the way. At any rate, he commissioned Denslow to draw a personal book plate for himself and his 2 daughters. For Edna, Denslow inscribed and illustrated a copy of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in the month of publication, and then he had Frank Baum autograph it as well. The book was for sale a few years ago by the Yonkers House in the United Kingdom. I remember seeing it. I had no idea what it went for. It turns out, because I contacted Christian Yonker, who owns the company, a few months ago. Back then, it went for $250,000. And I asked him, I thought it might be kind of cool to have that book in our house. I said, you think the owners would be interested in selling it? He said, well, yeah, but he said, it'd probably be like $350,000. So I've been buying lottery tickets, and if I win, maybe I'll get the book. But in the materials, as items 4A, 4B, and 4C, you'll see the cover of The Wizard of Oz. You'll see the page that's inscribed by Denslow and the autograph by L. Frank Baum, and also copies of the book plates that have been commissioned by Wilkins to make for him and his 2 daughters. After 1910 or so, it really becomes difficult to track Charles and the family, except for the daughter Julia, who married in 1907 and ended up coming back to the borough. Lived here for quite a few years. The 1900 census shows Charles, Harry, Julia, and Edna on Wenonah and Willow Street. By 1910, the U.S. Census has Charles, Hattie, and Edna on 48th Street in Philadelphia. Julia was married by that time, and she was living on South 50th Street, so not far away from her parents, with her husband in an owned home. I'm guessing one that her husband maybe brought into the marriage, but that's just a guess on my part. There was a time when New Jersey did censuses every 5 years between the federal censuses. And so in 1915, there was a New Jersey census. In that one, Julia, her husband Richard, and Hattie, the mother, show up on Willow Street again, along with Richard Erskine, who's Julia's husband. And he's listed as owning the home, but I just think that's an error. Maybe you just said I own it, but I doubt that he did. Charles was nowhere to be found. 5 years later, in the 1920 U.S. Census, Charles, Hattie, and Edna, who's now 36 years old, are living in Dallas, Texas. Charles is listed himself as manager of a storage battery business, and Edna is a librarian in a public library. Julia and Richard are still back on Willard Street, and Richard's showing up as owner of the home. By 1922, I mentioned this, that the Toronto directory shows Charles and Hattie in Toronto. In 1924, Hattie dies in Toronto. On the death certificate, Charles was listed as the husband, and the death certificate indicated they had been in their Toronto address for 3 years. And then I found some Toronto directories after that all the way up to 1933, when Charles dies, it always has him in Toronto. So I think 1921-ish, 1933, he's in Toronto and he's doing the storage battery business. Just to finish up with Julia and Richard, in the 1930 census and also in the 1940 census, they're at 101 South Princeton, which is the house they moved to after they moved out of the Willow Street house, which was designed by Richard Erskine, who's an architect. He also designed the Sparks house at 109 South Princeton. Now, the house itself, according to Lucy Schultz, the 206 East Willow Street property was sold in 1921 to her father, Willard Thatcher. They occupied the house until Willard Thatcher's death, and the estate sold it in 1973 to Louis and Diane Concordia. They sold the property 18 months later to George and Carolyn Wiedis, W-I-D-A-S, I guess that's what it is. In July '79, the Wiedises sold the house to Mike and Sue McNally, and they were in there for 31 years until Marna and I came along and bought the house in April of 2010. So there really haven't been that many owners. And a lot of the owners were there for very extended periods of time. When we moved in, we did a fair amount of renovation work. And in the process, we found a roof joist up in the attic where an electrician, they were stringing knob and tube way back when, the electrician signed his name on the roof joist. We also found, dated 1913, in an enclosed area in the bathroom. It's hard to explain what it was, but a signed piece by a carpenter in 1913. And we found some plumbing signed by a plumber in 1913. So we concluded in 1913 a fair amount of infrastructure type work was being done to that house. Our house originally was identical to 107 East Willow. So, and that house was for sale 5 years ago or so. And I went through it, and it's the same except for it's just a mirror image. Everything on the right side of theirs is the left side of ours. But other than that, the house was identical. In our house, when you walk in the front door, it's completely open to the living room on your right. That's sort of grand woodwork around. That's what my wife fell in love with, and why we ended up buying the house, I think. But in 107 East Willow, when you walk in, it's a wall, and there's just a doorway going there. And that was one of the changes that was made. There also is a bay window in our living room. There's not a bay window in the 107 house. If you look at the front of the 107 house, there's like a turret thing in the middle and two dormers in the front. In our house, the turret thing is gone, replaced by sort of a shed dormer, and the two dormers that were more gable style, right and left of that, aren't there anymore. But if you go up in our attic, you can see that they were there once. You can see the plaster, you can see where they, it was cut out and they filled it in and stuff. We think that Richard Erskine is responsible for a lot of those changes. The guy was an architect, and we think, that he and Julia were effectively in the house from 1910 or something until it was sold to Willard Thatcher. Charles had he owned it, but I think because they weren't there, as long as what they wanted to do was reasonable, they probably said, fine, go ahead and do it. I have no idea if that's accurate, but that's what we think happened there. I also do recall the electrician in our house, when we were having work done, commenting that there's a bunch of knob and tube wiring which has been decommissioned. It's not active, but it's still there. He said it's the best wiring he's ever seen in his life. He said the quality of this stuff will last forever. I guess if you own an electrical supply company, you can just get your hands on the best materials, and that's what Charles did. There's some old photos of the house marked as 5. They're the ones that look like snapshots. You can see in this photo, there's a little cross sort of coming up here. That's the cross on the central turret that isn't there anymore. There's a fireplace here that came down into the dining room that's no longer there. But other than that, the house is pretty much the same then as it is now. This photo is in front of the house. It shows very little of the house, but it's such a cool picture of a grocery delivery truck. And so I just put it in there for that reason. I think this picture is from the 1950s. I was sitting, we had been in our house a few months. I was sitting on the front porch one day. A car pulls up, a guy jumps out, he's in coveralls. He's got these 8x10 photos. He hands them to me and says, I came across these cleaning out my mother's house. I figured you should have them more than I should, so here they are. So that was Lucy Schultz's son, and she had died, and he was helping, and she lived on Woodbury Glassboro Road at the time, and he was helping clean out and go through the effects and so forth that came across those. And so that's how we got that picture. The skinny little tree that's right there, I can figure out where it is relative to the bluestone pieces that make the walkway. I'm almost positive that's the same as a giant maple that's sitting there now. I think it's exactly the same tree. Not sure, but I think it is. Turning now to Julia for a moment. She was born in Philadelphia in 1882, really grew up in Wenonah. She went to school here and attended Bordentown College, which closed like the year she graduated. They ran out of money. In 1907, she married Richard Erskine, a young architect. As I mentioned, it looks like they lived in Philadelphia for a few years, then moved to Wenonah. They lived at 206 East Willow, and then purchased a home that he designed at 101 South Princeton. They did not have any children. I haven't been able to find much information about her, but I did find a recounting by Pat Hart in the March 2003 Wenonah newsletter of a garden party in 1929 where the Wenonah Women's Club staged a continuous performance of, pardon my French, Le Jardin de Paris, the Garden of Paris. And it was for the benefit of the library. It was held at the gardens of Julia and Richard Erskine. They served supper to 260 guests, so it was a pretty big affair. Julia died in 1964, and on the death certificate, she's in New Brunswick where she dies, although it said her residence was Lakewood at the time. So it's not clear between the 1940 census and 1964 when she leaves Wenonah. My guess is she was there for a number of years, but I just don't know when she left. Her husband, Richard, died early. He died in 1943. He was an architect with the architectural firm of Morris and Erskine, and he joined in 1909. And then when Morris died in 1922, Richard continued the firm and kept the name the same. The firm was the architect for many hospitals and other institutional buildings, as well as residential projects primarily in New Jersey. Erskine designed a number of houses in Wenonah, including his own residence at 101 South Princeton, as well as 109 South Princeton, which is the current Sparks residence, which I think is the most handsome house in all of Wenonah. I love that house. And one of the benefits of moving into 206 East Willow is I could just look at the Sparks house. I just think it's a gorgeous piece of architecture and the way it's set back and everything. He's also credited with being the architect for the Wenonah Public Library building. I wasn't able to confirm that, but I did read that in one place. He was on the board of trustees of the library and was a director at the Vineland State Home. He also was an avid ornithologist, which is a bird watcher, was a member of the Delaware Valley Ornithological Club, which had been founded by his partner, Mr. Morris. So I thought, well, he was just trying to get in good with the boss, so that's why he joined it. But then I found an accounting where it's 1927, he's with some other people, they're driving back up from somewhere down in Delaware, driving back up to Philadelphia, New Jersey. And they stop at some marshes outside Wilmington, and he spots a glossy ibis. And it's this first spotting of a glossy ibis since 1866. He's doing this in 1927. So I guess he had some credentials if he could spot a glossy ibis. So I think he was actually into it pretty seriously. Unfortunately, we know even less about Edna Wilkins than we do about her sister Julia. She was born in 1884, grew up in Wenonah. Have no idea if she attended college after high school like Julia did. In 1910, she's living with her parents in Philadelphia. No occupations listed. I found a newspaper account of a party thrown by an Edna Wilkins in Gloucester City in 1915. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Wilkins were at the party, so I believe that could be our Edna. But maybe not, I don't know. She would have been 31 years old at the time. 5 years later, the 1920 U.S. Census has her in Dallas, Texas with her parents, and she's working as a librarian. Couldn't find her in the 1930 census. In the 1940 census, she's in San Diego, California, living with an aunt. She died in 1953 while living in Imperial Beach, California, just outside San Diego, but we really don't know much about her. The entire Wilkins family, that's Charles, Hattie, Edna, Julia, and Julia's husband, Richard, are all buried in Wenonah Cemetery. In there is a picture of their 5 plots and kind of where it sits, so you can find it if you ever want to go there, along with each of the individual tombstones. And you know, I took those pictures on Wednesday, and it was a gorgeous day. And I didn't know where they were, so I was traipsing around looking for them. And I was very businesslike about it while I was looking for them, but then I found them. And this is all I've been doing for like the past week, is researching these folks. And you know, you sort of feel like you know. And then I realized, because Julia didn't have kids, Edna didn't have kids, the Charles Wilkins line died out. There aren't any more. So I was standing there and I realized I probably know more about these people than anybody else in the world. At this point. It's a strange feeling. Now you guys know. But it was just such an odd feeling. I'm going to switch to E. Ward Wilkins for just a minute, the brother, because he lived in Wenonah, he was active as well. He was born in 1859. He was 5.5 years younger than Charles. I told you I have no idea what E stands for. He became a partner in the electrical business. In 1883, he married Anna Winship, a daughter of E.R. Winship of Philadelphia, and they had 3 children, Lena, Myra, and Warren. He was a member of the Electrical Association of Philadelphia, trustee of the Presbyterian Church, a Mason, a member of the Franklin Institute, the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, I have no idea what that is, as well as the Junior Order of American Mechanics. He was an ardent sportsman and lover of athletics. The family took up residence in Wenonah, but it's not clear exactly when. I found a Philadelphia directory that showed him living in Wenonah in 1886. So I think he and Charles came here at around the same time. The 1900 census shows E. Ward and Anna living in an owned house in Wenonah. And at first you think it's the one before you get to Charles on the census. So you think, well, maybe it's 204 at least, because that's how the census takers would do it. But the census taker seems to have made a mark in the number that he gives the dwelling. And I think they were all maybe packed into 206 East Willow. I'm not sure, but I think that's what might be going on. I put a copy of the census report in there. You can see if you think the census taker marked it up or not. The 1904 directory has E. Ward and the family on South 46th Street. By the time of the 1910 census, they're renting on South 44th Street in Philadelphia. Between 1910 and 1920, he's at several addresses in Philadelphia. And then finally, by the 1920 census, he, his wife, and 2 of the children are at 1109 Wilton Street, South Wilton Street in Philadelphia, that he owns, and he's there until his death. in 1932 at age 71. And that became his final residence. He died in Presbyterian Hospital in Philadelphia. His obituary was in the New York Times. They credited him with manufacturing some of the earliest inventions of Thomas Edison, and said he helped erect the telephone line used at the Centennial Exposition of 1876, which was really the first general public demonstration of the telephone. He's buried in Fernwood Cemetery on Baltimore Avenue in Lansdowne, which isn't far from where he lived on Rowan Street. Now, for the last part of my talk, are any of you aware of the great piano contest that the Wenonah School won in 1895? No? That's good. That's good. And is Larry here?
Larry did not.
No. I'm curious if he knows. If he doesn't know, then I know something about, you're soon going to know, something about Wenonah history that no one seems to know about. This is a great story. There was a paper called the Philadelphia Times, which was a pretty big paper at the time, I guess. And in 1885, in the summer, or early fall, they ran a piano contest in Philadelphia. And there was a ballot in the paper, and you could vote your ballot. You had to mail it into the newspaper. Whatever school that you listed on your ballot, whatever school got the most number of votes, the top two schools, each got an upright piano of their choosing. And it did very well, and I guess it sold a lot of papers. So they decided in the fall of 1895 that they were going to open it up to South Jersey as well. So they announced in the October 19th edition of the paper that two schools in South Jersey that get the most number of votes between now and December 31 will each win a piano. So the way they did it was, in every daily paper, there was a coupon, and it counted as one vote. In every Sunday paper, there were 5 coupons. There was one coupon that counted as 5 votes. So you could collect coupons. You didn't have to be an adult. You could be a kid to send them in. You could send in 10 coupons at once. You could do whatever you wanted. Just get the votes in. But the condition was the votes had to arrive no later than 7 days after the date that they were published in the paper. So you couldn't hoard votes and bring them all in at the end. You had to get them in within a week. And what the paper would do is they would, every day or two, they would tell you the tally. That so-and-so's, Palmyra's got this many votes, Wenonah's got this many. And they created this real sort of rivalry going, this real competition, and probably sold a lot more papers that way. So it turns out, so the contest was open to any institution in New Jersey conducted for the education of young people, including colleges, academies, and public and private schools of every kind. So this was wide open to a lot of different schools. As it turned out, by December 31, Wenonah had the most votes and won a piano. Now what's really interesting is, in the first contest held in the Philadelphia schools, the school that had the highest number of votes had 199,000 votes. The school with the next most number had 115,000 votes. In the New Jersey contest, our little borough, our school, came in with 411,000 votes. So I looked up the population of Wenonah in 1895. There had just been a New Jersey census. There were 100 families in the borough. 473 people, including residents at the Wenonah Inn, okay? So I did the math. If every Wenonah family bought a paper every day, including Sunday, clipped the ballot, mailed it in, the grand total for all 100 families would have been 11,800 votes. If every person bought a paper, including little infant Tommy, who's only 3 months old, if every resident bought one, the number would be 56,000 votes, way short of the 411,000. So getting to that number was quite an achievement. Now the awarding of the piano occurred on Saturday, February 22nd, 1896, which is Washington's birthday, and it was done in grand style. A special train was commissioned to bring the piano, as well as the managing editor and other Times employees to Wenonah. The train was met at the station by a welcoming committee led by Mayor Dawson, who escorted the guests to Wenonah Inn for the ceremonies. Among those present were Stephen Green, Andrew Carey, Charles Wilkins, who was president of the school board at the time, Mayor Dawson, Mr. Farr, Dr. Stout, Mr. and Mrs. Cookson, Mrs. Schultz, Mrs. Johnson, Professor Ballinger, Mrs. Bugby, Mr. Herf, Mr. Andrews, Mr. Peddle, Mr. Sinnott, is that how you say it? Sinnott, okay. And others, including even a Wanamaker from Philadelphia. Mayor Dawson opened the ceremonies and introduced Mr. Fenner, who was managing editor at the Times. Mr. Fenner had a whole bunch to say, but one of the things he said was about New Jersey sand. Larry, do you know about the Great Piano Contest? You didn't know about it? All right.
Larry, we gotta find a piano after this.
So I know I called the school. They have no idea where the piano is. They have no idea. So anyway, so this managing editor of the Times. This is part of his speech. A word about Jersey sand. During the late war, of men of invincible courage, of men who could march steadily forward, while cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleying and thundering, of men who, with unflinching heroism, could walk into the very jaws of death. Of such men, he said, they've got sand in their gizzards. There was no joke in that kind of sand. There was no joke in the Jersey sand of which our forefathers gave the British and the Hessians taste at Trenton and Princeton and Monmouth 118 years ago under the leadership of the man whose birthday we celebrate today. There was no joke in the Jersey sand with which Judson Kilpatrick and Philip Kearny 35 years ago carried in their hearts to the battlefields of Virginia. And there was no joke to her rivals in the Jersey sand which prompted little Wenonah to wrestle for and win the first prize in the Times Great Piano Contest. To capture it from the whole state, including the big cities of Atlantic and Camden, took the same sort of sand which inspired little David to go out and battle with and vanquish the giant Goliath. I believe in Jersey sand. Measured in square miles, Wenonah is not very big, but in the language of the immortal bard, she gets there just the same. So that's the introduction, but that's the speech being made by the presentation of the piano by the manager, the editor of the Times. So then Mrs. Hollinger plays two selections of the piano and gets a lot of applause. And Mayor Dawson gets up and introduces the next speaker, who's the real man behind the scenes, Charles Wilkins. In his introduction, Mayor Dawson said, when the Times announced this contest, there was one citizen of Wenonah who thought it would be a good idea to win the piano. The very next day, he stuck a placard in his window announcing that votes for the Wenonah School in the Times Piano Contest would be taken inside. So I assume that's inside 206 East Willard. During the succeeding weeks, he worked hard, and we see the result. Few can appreciate the work he did and the worry that was attached to it. And it is but fitting that he should reply to the presentation speech. I take pleasure in introducing Mr. Charles Wilkins, President of the school board. Now I'm going to read Charles's speech in its entirety. It's a little lengthy, but it captures, I think, a lot of him and a lot of the spirit of the town. The same spirit we have right now, what's going on with, everything with the tornado and stuff. So this is Charles. The beautiful instrument that has been so graciously presented to our school and the charming and melodious tones it has given forth call for more than a mere formal expression of thanks. Words are but the shadows of our thoughts, and therefore if I convey only a dim outline of our gratitude, it will be owing to the fact that I am unable to find words in which to give expression to all the things we feel. In accepting this splendid gift for our school, I speak for the scholars, the teachers, the officers of our board, and our people, and say in all sincerity that you have our heartfelt thanks, not only for the gift itself, but for the interest you have shown by coming here and making an eventful day in the history of our school. In the days to come, as our children march or sing in unison with the music of this piano, they will have a constant reminder of the times and its interest in the cause of music in the public schools. Back then, public schools couldn't buy musical instruments like that for like music departments or stuff. You had to figure out another way to get your piano or whatever. The elevating and refining influence of music is conceded by all, and who can estimate its effect on the minds of the young and impressionable? We may never know how many youthful lives may have been turned into channels of gentleness and usefulness through the agency of music and its power. We therefore feel grateful to the Times for this gift, and shall value it highly and never regret the contest for the prize which is today awarded upon us. It may interest you if I refer briefly to the struggle for the honor of winning. When in October last, the Times announced that a contest was open to the schools of New Jersey, some of our people who are anxious to have Wenonah School enter the lists and in a humble way began to collect votes for their favorite. When the vote was first announced and Wenonah stood 5th, we were not discouraged, but on the contrary, were spurred on to greater efforts to gain the coveted first place. In a little while, we reached the head of the line, but only to be sent back in a day or two. Then, in the language of the day, we got to move on. It has been said that all the world loves a lover, and when little Wenonah began to fight in earnest, its efforts excited an emotion which might be paraphrased thus: all hustlers help a hustler. Friends flocked to our aid from every quarter. Coupons came pouring in from unexpected places. From Lancaster, Reading, Columbia, from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, from Wilmington, Baltimore, and Washington, and all parts of New Jersey, notably our neighbor Woodbury, and even from Atlanta, Georgia. We received weekly supplies of coupons until after the close of the competition. While our school children were small in number, they worked like little beavers, and you will understand how interested they were when I tell you that some of them devoted their candy pennies to the cause and bought papers. Kind friends furnished copies of the Times by thousands, and the children gave up their recess time for the purpose of cutting out and counting coupons. So the contest went on, and despite the jeers of some skeptics who doubted our ability to win, we kept on with the idea that there was no such word as fail in our contest dictionary. There were times when the fight was close, but our destination was first place. With that thought in mind, we kept on to the end. The result is seen today. We can only say, thus far our fortune keeps an upward course, and we are graced with wreaths of victory. I think that's from Shakespeare. We extend thanks to all kind friends who helped, and we are assured that they rejoice with us today, a privilege that might not have been so truly theirs had they withheld their helping hands. We thank you all for what you have done for us, and shall ever hold in grateful remembrance your freely given aid. Then there were some remarks by Stephen Green, Andrew Carey, and Ebor Wilkins spoke as well. They served lunch at the inn. The whole affair lasted 4 hours. And the next day, the Times gave a full-page spread to this event, and you've got it in there. So the last item on the right behind my speech is a folded in half. My printer, the biggest I could do with my printer was whatever size that is, around like 17 or something. I also ordered a ton of little plastic magnifying glasses, but they didn't come in time. My 30-year-old daughter reads that sheet like it's nothing. She just like reads it, right? I'm there with a magnifying glass trying to read the thing. But it's a fascinating account, and I mean, you see a picture of the school. You know that the school existed then because there's a picture of the school.
It's brand new.
Yeah, brand new at that point. And you know, the drawings of the people, I don't know if they took them from photos, but you know, that stuff has to be sketched and put in there. I mean, a lot of work went into this. And so I looked up the cost of a newspaper in the Philadelphia Times. So the dailies cost a penny, and the Sunday ones cost 5 cents. So let's just assume, so that means that every vote, because you get 5 votes with the 5 cents, every vote costs a penny, right? So if there's 411,000 votes, and everyone's a penny, move the decimal point over to, the piano cost $4,111, basically, which back then was a lot. So, you know, I'm guessing the piano was actually, we just went out and bought the damn piano, probably a lot cheaper, but we wouldn't have had nearly the camaraderie.
Well, people in Atlanta, Georgia wouldn't maybe have contributed to that.
And I don't know how from Atlanta, of course, probably the post stuff probably went quickly back then. But remember, they had to get their stuff in and up and had to get over to 8th and Chestnut within a week.
Yeah.
So,
amazing.
yeah. So anyway, so I closed with that story just because I found it fascinating. I had never seen it before. I loved the spread in the paper, which is why I copied it and gave it to you guys. So any questions you want, I'm going to scoop when we're done, but any questions you have, I'll try to answer them.
I got a favor. Would it be possible to get a very clean page? Because they're all folded in half. If you give me a very clean page, I would love to hang that in the school.
Yep. I can print them out. I can try to make it a little
Whatever.
I play with the contracts and stuff too. Which I didn't
Waited a
do
couple
for this.
100 years, you know.
But I did contact the school, and they had no knowledge of the piano.
That is awesome.
I doubt it would have lasted that long, but the one they bought was I think it was called a Steck or a Streck, I'm not sure which.
Huh.
And what they were noted, one of the things they were noted for was having soundboards. It was some sort of an iron reinforcing bar. It didn't distort as much as soundboards would do in a typical upright piano. For schools, that was great because you didn't have to worry about it going out of tune quite as frequently. So that's the piano we bought. But we didn't have to. We had our choice. And you'll read the thing. Wilkins' speech. He says, the paper kept their word. They told us go out and get what you want. And I went out and got what we wanted. So
You found history we've never heard of. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
I know. I had never come across it. And I thought, if I'm going to spend all this time on this section everybody knows about it, that's going to be a bummer. So I asked Jenny, have you ever heard of it? She said no. She said, but I'm not really the one who necessarily would know. And everybody decided, Larry, if anybody would know, you knew. So, but you say you didn't have, I never heard of it either. So,
You got a question, Karen?
Yeah, being from Woodbury, you probably already know that the old Charlie Brown's in the 1700s was the Wilkins Inn. And the connection with me is that Mr. Wilkins married one of the Whitehall daughters, Hannah. Is there a connection between the Woodbury Wilkins and the Wilkins we're talking about tonight?
no, I found lots of stuff on that, but no, I don't think there is.
No.
I mean, I don't know whether there's some common ancestor back. There might be. But Wilkins is a pretty common name. Charles Wilkins is a pretty common name. And there's even a number, there was a Woodbury Charles Wilkins, I don't know if he had the same middle initial he might have, that was born just like a year later or earlier or something. So a lot of stuff I was reading was, I thought I found something, and then when I went deeper, I found, it's not the guy at all, so.
So Karen there does the 5th grade presentation every year to our 5th grade students at Wenonah School. You've just added at least one page.
Oh, yeah. We got more.
So, yeah, I mean, there's, I think Green was putting up some money from time to time to just buy papers. I think they'd say, we gotta buy like another 300 papers. He'd give them, $3, I guess, whatever it was. So I think he was sort of in there behind the scenes doing this stuff. But I think it was Charles who decided, we're going to win this thing, because the next day he's put his placard into the window saying, send your votes here. And I think he's the kind of guy that when he set his mind to something, we're going to do it. It's just going to get done. And they did it.
And now that would all be on the internet,
Right.
liable to be asking everybody
Right.
to vote, but that they could do it back then, it's just amazing.
Right. 411,000 votes. It's just imagine.
You think that'd be
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.